So I'm going to start this Q&A with Ursula. As you may not know, how many people know the composer Frederick Rzewski? And how many know that he died very recently? So I think, because Ursula, I'm just guessing, of all of us, has had the closest relationship and the longest. I wanted her to say a few words.
Well, his death was quite unexpected. It was on June 26th. Actually, after this, I will be playing one of the latest pieces he wrote, which was a piece he wrote last summer, finished in August. He was in a very good mood. He was writing a lot. I had asked him to write a piece about 6 or 10 minutes long, because I was also working on Chopin nocturnes. And, well, okay. He was mainly known for his piano music. The great piece, The People United Will Never Be Defeated. Oh, many of you heard of it. The North American Ballads. De Profundis. Songs of Insurrection. He wrote a great deal for piano, and he was a virtuosic pianist. He's American. He was educated at Harvard and Princeton, but spent most of his adult life in Europe, and was a great friend of many of us. We miss him. He was very involved. He thought a great deal about politics, and was very much for basically the common man. His political ideas weren't always the most sensible, but his heart was always in the right place, I can't say. And it's mainly that he was one of the richest composers of piano music, not only of our time, but really of any time. And we miss him. I don't know, have any of you played the North American Ballads, any of them? Down by the riverside? No. That's quite a popular piece that some of you might enjoy playing. Frederick was also a great friend to many people. He crossed the lines between classical and jazz. He didn't play jazz, he was a great improviser, but many of his best friends were fantastic jazz musicians like Anthony Braxton and George Lewis. And I have to say, personally, he opened up my own world. I won't say more because I will play you a piece of his, which is how we get to know our musical friends.
Thank you. Okay, so moving on, I want to ask this group the same kind of question that we had before, and that is, anybody can answer. Did you have a special experience, or was there a certain moment, or was there a window of time when you moved from going to your weekly lesson with whoever you were studying with to working alone, and having that sense of, gee, I don't need to have a teacher all the time. I can become my own teacher and get my own repertory ready for performance or whatever? Because the reason I ask that is because these people should be transitioning into that kind of time period where they can work alone and, you know, get something really ready on a professional level. So how did that come about for you, Christopher? Anyone can answer.
It has come about.
Well, maybe. Maybe that's why I haven't learned many pieces. No, actually, it's interesting for me. I started to feel that I could start to prepare my own repertoire when I started teaching myself. So, as a graduate student, I mean, I went from Eastman to Indiana, and I became an AI, what we call it, Michigan GSIs. And when I became responsible for other people's learning, and therefore started to teach them how to play legato, how to do whatever, and to shape their pieces, I started to do the same thing more often with myself. So I've learned, actually I feel that I am my best student, because I have the most control over me. And so I've come to think that, and I had always taken responsibility for choosing my own repertoire. Maybe that's a little unusual, but I always decided what I wanted to play, and so maybe that was the first step towards shaping it myself and teaching, for sure.
Anyone else?
Well, it's probably a little different being a composer, but there's nothing like having a lesson once a week and a deadline to keep you writing music. I mean, I mentioned that I had studied with Roger Sessions, who I consider one of the great 20th century composers and teachers, and it wouldn't have dawned on me not to show up at a lesson. It wouldn't have dawned on me to show up with a lesson not with a piece of music. And he even told me once, you know, you don't have to bring in music every week, but I wanted to get the most out of that experience. But after I graduated from Juilliard, I did take some time off, and I thought, maybe you're one of those people that's not ever going to write music again. And that lasted for about 6 weeks, and then I just couldn't stand not doing it, so I kept doing it.
I confess that by the time I had finished studying, and I had to stay in school in some way because I had to keep out of the draft. You don't know about that, but there was a military draft, and I had a student deferment, which I was eligible for up till the age of 26. After 26, it was rather complicated, but in any case, I had to be registered as a student until past my 26th birthday. And around 24, I was sick of teachers. But there was, between teachers and going into the army, it was clear that the decision I had to make. But my last year as a student was as a Fulbright in Paris, studying with the great Alfred Cortot. And I had the opportunity of extending that Fulbright. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to play for people anymore. And later, when I came back to the United States, my New York teacher, Edward Steuermann, another great musician, wanted very much that I continue to play for him. And I knew that his ideas were more brilliant than mine, and more imaginative and more experienced, and I didn't care. I wanted to find my own, and he was a little hurt, but I can advise you, don't worry about hurting teachers in this way. They'll find their way, and you have to do what you think is best for you. So I was very happy to stop playing for people, actually.
Okay, what about you, Kenneth?
I was afraid you would ask that. Well, my journey was a little different. I think that in a way, I spent many years working with Leon Fleischer, who was the kind of teacher, he was a very powerful presence, but it was as if he almost took a step back from the previous teachers I'd had. He didn't really involve himself personally, many times sort of working on a piece. He liked to hear a piece once, and then you'd bring him another piece. And if you brought it twice, he said, I've already given you a lesson on it. Or because he taught in groups of 3, if I brought a piece that someone else had played in the group, he said, I already taught that. So I was sort of put in a position that I had to sort of think a lot on my own and take my own initiative as to the repertoire that I would learn and how I could look at a piece of new music and figure it out and bring it to him, and with that one lesson try to figure out how that would become a piece for me. So I think by the time I was 26 or so, I and my career really started to take off. Occasionally I would play for a teacher, and I think I saw Mr. Fleischer when I was 27 the last time, when I had a lesson with him. And I remember he told me, he said, my advice to you is just to forget everything I ever taught you. And that was really good advice, because it forced me to take complete responsibility for my own decisions and not to feel somehow that he had some sort of authority over me, which is, I think, is a problem sometimes. That if you get attached to your teacher, you depend on them for their advice. And teachers don't really have any more authority to make music or interpret music than anyone else. It's just usually a question of experience and age. So,
You know,
yeah.
it might be a good idea to have a master class. This could be, I don't know if we can fit it in, or because we don't have time, but next year we could certainly have this idea of you have to bring a piece that only you have played for yourself, and then you play it, and just finish it. And I mean, it's not, you know, we're not going up to Carnegie Hall, it's not a competition, but I mean, just to complete the process by yourself, because, you know, we all have different stories about how we made that transition, and we get different signals. It's like, you know, the electrical shock where you really need, oh, okay, now it's time for me to, excuse my French, get off my ass and do it by myself. It comes with different insights. But I think it's a very, very important thing for you all to try to do. Because there is no one way, as they say, to slice an apple. I think where there is one right way to play a Beethoven sonata or whatever it is. But I'm not sure how many of you have the need to make something from scratch without going and getting something that's already made by Publix or wherever you shop.
Yes. Well, when I was youngish, let's say in college, I really didn't want lessons from anyone, and especially because my mother had been very authoritarian, and also my teacher at the time was very authoritarian. And I think I was thinking at that time, well, who has more authority than the piano teacher? It's the composer. So one reason I started playing new music was that I could have the composer tell me what she or he thought about, rather than getting it from a secondary source. But then later on, after school, when I really no longer had the possibility of playing for a teacher, I found that it was very helpful to play a lot of chamber music and have other musicians my age basically make commentaries and say, could you try this this way and that way? And that was a very important part, it still is a part of my life, in terms of getting feedback and learning to play. And it's something I hope you'll all include in your life.
What are the two Dmitris?
Go ahead.
You can both do a duet.
I think for me, it's kind of was in and out, because I really did get sick of lessons, I think, at a certain time as well, when I was doing my doctorate. Although I have to say that my teacher, Svetlana, she did take a number of steps back, but she was an incredible listener, and this was different, playing like performing, and not necessarily going, oh, I just made this mistake, she's going to not notice that, she's going to... It was very different. It was evaluating sound and just the overall scope of things. But then I thought I was done, and then I ran into another person who showed me that I wasn't done and made me think again. And showed me, I think, that there's always that possibility when you're an adult and you're done with school to still have that confident pair of ears, people who really know what you up against and what you're struggling with, that you could, privately go and play for. I think that was important for me, to know that that door has not been shut forever, that possibility has to exist. And I know for a fact that important performers, really famous people, had a very secret, friend sometimes, or an older person that they would play for before an important performance. So I don't think that door shuts once and for all.
Well, for me, as I grew older, when I was still a student, I felt that I needed, I was less and less dependent on weekly lessons. But on the other hand, I always felt that we always remain students of music for the rest of our lives. So whenever I prepared a new recital program, I always liked to play for someone I respected, to get a feedback, to get an opinion and a pair of ears, as as you said. And I think that will always remain. So, on the one hand, we mature, we learn from our experience, but on the other hand, we always remain students of our art. That's my experience.
You know, one of the things that's, I think, interesting for us, well, especially those of us that are, you know, we didn't grow up with the ability to record ourselves and listen back. There weren't cell phones. I mean, even the tape recorder. Well, I remember when television came in. We were just, you know, it was like this whole technology wasn't around. So the difference between what you think you're doing and what you're actually doing, there is that gap. And there was no way to close that because you couldn't record yourself. You had to play for somebody, and then you actually had to take that person's word. But it's very different, you know, it's a very subjective thing. Now, I think the whole process of finishing up your own piece by yourself is a little bit easier because you need a fairly good recording device. I don't think the iPhone does it because it doesn't have nuance and color. It will soon. I mean, maybe the iPhone 13 will be great. But I mean, you can get a Zoom recorder or something like that. You get quite a bit of information. And then I think, my feedback is many of you don't record yourself. And then when you do, you think, oh my God, is that what I'm doing? So, then you are advanced enough to have some tools to be able to modify and say, well, gee, Mr. Fleischer would have hated that, or Mr. Sherwood would have hated that, or Rosina Levine would have gone running out of the room. I mean, whoever it is, you have voices that you could contact and guide. So that's a piece of advice I think you should use.
Can I just add something to
Of course.
that? The feedback. I think I became aware, like in my 30s, when I really didn't play for anybody, any teachers, that I started playing for members of my family. If I was, visiting my parents who were not musicians, I would play for them. My sister, who was very talented but not fully trained. And I found that the feedback I got from just ordinary, people who might go to a concert, those things that they say, the impressions they would get, were actually very helpful to me. Sometimes we can get in our own little world of what we think is important and miss the fact that we're actually playing for people who are not as in tune with all the detail as we are. So that's certainly helpful.
So we've reached the point, if you'd like to ask questions, this is now the moment, about anything. Ask any of us anything, almost anything. Yes?
What is something that you find really inspiring about teaching that maybe you did not anticipate before? Or maybe something that you find inspiring that maybe you did when you were younger in your teaching career or adult?
Who would like to answer?
Maybe we could hear the question a little louder because we didn't get it.
What is something that you find really inspiring about teaching that maybe you did not anticipate you would discover?
Well, teaching is another way of performing, and just as performing is another way of teaching. And the great challenge of teaching, which is greater even than the challenge of performing, is that you have to get it right. In performing, you can try this or that, and some things work and some things don't, and the next time you do it a little differently. But when you teach, you really have a responsibility. So if you recommend something, it has to be the right thing. And if you're not sure whether you want to recommend, you have to say you're not sure that you want to recommend. So that you have to put everything everything in a very clear context, whereas in a performance, you can allow yourself to improvise, and we do.
Any more comments? From anybody to the gentleman's question?
I mean, I think that there is the expected part of what you hear back, and then there is the part that you're not prepared for, right? I'm not talking about wrong notes or memory slips. I'm talking about, like, so I hear this back and I recognize it. This is our work together. This comes back at me. This is familiar. This is something we wanted to do and it's coming out. And then there's the better part of it, which you may expect, which is, this is a different piece. We haven't talked about it, but it's already there. It's been extrapolated and reused. And then there's this astonishing part. This is completely new. We haven't talked about it. It grew on its own because of all the other things that were put in previously. That's the best reward. That doesn't happen very often.
I think I would like to say that, you know, when I started teaching, well, I guess I started teaching when I was very young, and looking back on it, I didn't know anything about anything, but that's beside the point. I enjoyed being with somebody else, and I enjoyed sharing what little I knew. Now, as an older person, I think I enjoy teaching myself more than I enjoy teaching anybody else. I mean, I'm very receptive to whatever ideas come my way, and I can reach very deeply in myself and bring about change and try ideas and explore this and that, and it's in a controlled environment, you know, so where I can be adventuresome and yet proper and refined or whatever. And, you know, when I teach other people, there's always this, which I love, that's one of the things, you know, when you say something or make an idea or whatever you're doing, there's an element of unpredictability and surprise. Because you really don't know the other person the way I've become knowledgeable about myself over, you know, basically we've all been teaching ourselves and others for forever. I mean, I've been teaching myself and other people for 60 years. That's a lot of experience there, in, you know, valuable experience. So I would, you know, I always encourage students to teach other people. Because the more you teach others, the more you learn how to teach others, and also the better you can teach yourself. So it gives you a very clear picture.
May I just follow on from that? What I didn't expect, you know, from teaching, because I never expected to be a teacher, and I didn't really want to teach. I think I nearly failed my piano pedagogy class in Peabody. But what I found progressively, as I you know, took on more and more students, and was exposed to music that I didn't even know sometimes, was this sort of taking a journey with the student of sort of not really knowing where this piece could go and discovering it with the student. And there's a kind of improvisation that goes on, that you sort of try things, and not knowing always the student. That sometimes I would have a new student coming in and I didn't really know how to connect, what approach would help to create some breakthrough in their playing. And that is a challenge, but I found it so inspiring approaching teaching in that way, of sort of coming from a position, especially with music that I don't know, of sort of starting from a place of ignorance, and then through the score, through studying on my own about the works and bringing it back and giving assignments to the student, that we're sort of discovering it together. And I find that such a creative side to my life now that certainly equals the work I do as a performer. So that was certainly very inspiring to me. I love that journey. It's really fun. Yeah.
Yes, Michael?
So what's the biggest piece of advice you would give to your present and future students?
Again, could you say that just slightly more slowly?
Yes, sorry. What's the biggest piece of advice you'd give to your present and future students?
The piece of advice, yeah. Don't listen to your teachers.
Actually, I think playing music, you combine trying to be accurate with trying to have a lot of fantasy and let your imagination do whatever it wants to do. And somehow the relationship between these two things are what's always the basis and also the mystery of making music. I can't.
My model for this is a story by the Argentine writer Borges. It's a story about an imaginary, a fictitious French writer from the early part of the 20th century who decides to rewrite several chapters of the 17th century Spanish masterpiece Don Quixote. He's going to rewrite these chapters without changing anything. Not a word, not a punctuation mark, but by the fact that he is who he is in his culture, he's going to give a different meaning to every word. Now, I think that's what we do as performers. We follow the composer as closely as possible, ideally not changing a punctuation mark, doing every note, every rhythm, every nuance as we think the composer intended. And in doing that, we find ourselves. And we don't have to make a conscious effort to interpret, by merely learning and ingesting, we interpret and we express our own individuality. I do believe that.
I'd like to just go back to something that Kenneth Frazelle said earlier about approaching a piece of music you don't know, which I think it has to do with every piece of music. If you're playing a Mozart sonata, you want to know Mozart operas, you want to know Mozart string quartets, you want to know Mozart symphonies. And these will teach you also. And they will teach you more than just looking at the score. There might be a forte somewhere. Why on earth is this forte there? And you look at an opera and you say, oh, the forte here means a new person has entered the room, something like that.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I think that speaking practically, the students who rise in their degrees and become successful after their final degree are the students who've really cultivated a sense of curiosity about music, not just doing it, not just doing what they've been told, but they want to explore all aspects of music, as Ursula is talking about. They want to ask questions, they want to know more, and they are hungry for it. And that manifests itself in their work, in their activities, in their attitude towards their practice and their life. Those are the students who really are successful in many, many ways. So I would say one of the best ways, if you find yourself to be not a curious person, and maybe that could be the case, I'm not sure that it's necessarily a virtue, but you can cultivate it by simply pretending that you are curious. That's one of the best ways. If you start acting as if you are curious, then oftentimes you become that person.
What role does mental practice play in your everyday, preparation of music?
I sure hope, given the constraints of our professional lives, that mental practice is enough, oftentimes. That's practically sometimes all the practice that you can get is mental practice. But it's important for everything. For time management, for instance, you can get a ton of stuff done in 5 minutes if you already know what you need to do at the piano, which presupposes that you have done some mental practice. You know, just on a basic level, where the difficult parts are in the piece. Why is it difficult? Do you not understand the harmony? For instance, when I have technical difficulty, 99% of the time it's because I don't really know what I'm playing. I don't know what the notes are, how the harmonies fit together, or I haven't decided what kind of gesture I need. That's kind of stuff that even if you're sitting at the piano, you ought to be thinking about mentally. So there's a kind of artificial line between mental practice or practice away from the piano and being at the piano, but it should all be mental practice.
You know, I think you do more, or are able to do more mental practice as you get older and you're not in school. I mean, believe it or not, when you're in school, you have tons of time to practice. I know it doesn't seem that way, but you have more time to practice now than you're ever going to have, as Dmitry said. And I mean, the thing about it is, I remember when I was in Bloomington, being on the second floor, and I had my favorite room. And I was practicing, but in retrospect, I was daydreaming. I was having a good time. I mean, I was relatively disorganized compared to, like, if you only have 45 minutes to practice or half an hour, then you really, just like Christopher was saying, you really have to think about how can I best use my time and what do I need to do? Because you're not on a cruise. Yes.
In light of the foregoing discussion about sort of being your own teacher after a certain point, I was wondering how you go about choosing new repertoire for yourselves to learn.
You need to play music that you are attracted to. Are you not picking your own music now?
Well, yes, I was just wondering, sort of
How do you pick your own music?
I guess, when I hear something that particularly draws me or just kind of wanted to learn for a while, or suggestions from other people, sort of a wide variety of places.
Maybe if you go to the composition department, you can ask somebody to write a piece for you.
I just want to say on this, as a teacher, I'm always kind of a red flag when I hear that I'm not crazy about such composers' music. And we're talking about like major composers. It usually means lack of exposure. And so if you start probing it, they have never played it, or they played one piece a long time ago, or they had some sort of a nasty experience with, you name it. And I think we have some sort of a shared responsibility here that when the last lessons happened and they got the final diploma and they're out in the big world, that all the doors will always be open. It's going to be music written yesterday and music written 400 years ago, that you have both enough curiosity and enough information, enough experience already to keep that avenue open and that avenue open. And if these doors are ever supposed to close, like, okay, you're not going to play Rameau, for some reason that's not working for you, then let it happen later, but not when you're still a student. So I never accept that. I say, I don't want to play. No, then I'm going to sign exactly that. Yeah, I have to make sure that we turn this around, that we turn this into a good relationship, so that all these avenues remain open for as long as possible.
Sometimes if something bothers you, that's a sign that actually it has some meaning for you. Even if initially you think, oh, this is weird, as opposed to having no reaction whatsoever. And one can also explore that. That's sometimes very rewarding.
I always find with my I always find with my students and myself, if I hear many recordings and I'm just not satisfied with what I hear, or my students say, I haven't heard anybody that liked it, and say, you need to play that piece. It means that you have something to say for that.
Okay, so I've been thinking about like future.
Can you speak louder?
Okay, I've been thinking about like future goal or like career goal as a musician or pianist. I would like to know what was your future goal as a musician when you were a student or when you were in university.
There are long-range and short-range goals. I think even as we're all students, but even now I have short-range goals and long-range goals. And I think that's probably true for everybody. So we have lots of different kinds of goals. And I hope you have many. Do you have many different goals?
I have, yeah, like you said, short length and long length goals. How about
About what?
like your ultimate goal as a
That's ultimate goal? Anybody?
Death.
The goal.
Well, I think going back to a previous question of what is the best advice, I think as we grow up, when we're younger, we have to be very curious, very wide open, and try all kinds of styles, all kinds of performing and learning music and studying all composers and try our hands at as many things as possible. As we grow older, we have to find our own voice. We have to find what strengths we may have, which would lead us to select our career. What are the things that we can succeed based on our inner strength, our talents? And I think it's a responsibility of a teacher to a certain extent to see what the student can excel in. It may be teaching certain type of students, or it could be accompanying, it could be focusing on certain styles, certain composers. There's a wide range of things that we can do. You just have to see what your student's potential is and what is a particular strength of any given student, and try to lead that student and gear that student in that direction.
You know, the question of ultimate goal is difficult because, for instance, we take our avocado tree. Our goal is always to get all the avocados. We have about 100 avocados. They're Haas avocados. Great. And it was really easy. At first the tree was only 5 feet tall. Now the tree is, 40 feet tall. And even though we prune the tree and we shape the tree, it keeps growing. And so I feel, bananas are the same way. You just reach for that top banana, but that top banana keeps getting higher. Even if you cut your banana trees down, they grow up again, and you reach and you stretch. And that's good. You get more flexibility, think yoga. So, the ultimate goal is, as long as one is alive, there is no ultimate goal. It just the universe keeps opening. And then the real question is, as I guess Mr. Shteinberg used to say, he wanted to live long and die fast. And he did. He accomplished that. And he felt, I know that his last recital he felt was his best, and he didn't even know he was dying at that time. So that must have been good feeling for him to walk off stage and say, I'm really proud of that recital, and whether it's, everybody's journey is a little bit different. But I think that when the lights go out, they go out.
Yeah. I remember Horshovsky recital at 98 at Carnegie Hall. Beautiful play, really beautiful. He was supposed to give a recital for his 100th anniversary, but he had to cancel, and then he passed.
There's also the fact that random events in your life will cause changes. Like, I'm sure many of you have jobs, or for scholarships. You accompany the chorus, you teach children, you help organize, let's say, someone's teaching schedule. And you may find that these are things you really like doing. And suddenly your focus changes a little bit from playing this Beethoven sonata as well as possible as to, I just love playing with singers. I want to see how I can do that as much as possible. And of course, pianists in their nature work by themselves. So we're always looking for ways to work with other people. I think one of the joys of teaching is that, playing chamber music. And these things you may not think of, this will be my goal. And yet you just find out that it becomes more and more interesting to you. And it's good to follow these things as they go.
Yes.
When you guys were students,
Can you speak louder? It's hard to hear.
when you guys were students in college, what were some classes that you took, besides the one-on-one private lessons you had, that really shaped the way you think or the way you think about music, or that you really enjoyed and that helped mold you into the musicians you are today?
I was a French major in college, and the decision to do that came at a particular moment. I had taken a not particularly interesting French course, and then I finished with a course specifically in what was then modern French literature. And there was a textbook called Contes modernes, Modern Stories. And I can tell you what was in this book for the most part, even today. The point is that when I read these stories, I suddenly knew that I was home, that I had found the place where I wanted to be. They had a particular kind of sensibility, a particular attitude, which I can't define, except that I knew that that was what I wanted. So I switched my plans and became a French major. And that actually changed my whole life, because then later I did a Fulbright in Paris, but also I continued. You see, at first it was these modern stories, and then it started opening up, and the world of French literature illuminated everything else I did, and I found then professionally, as I was developing a career as a performer, that it was very helpful for me to be able to talk to audiences, for example, about année de pèlerinage or students. I have asked students about the année de pèlerinage. Oh, it's years of pilgrimage. Yes, what does that mean? And the question, why did Liszt leave Paris and travel for several years in Europe? I won't tell you the answer to that question, but it changed people's understanding to understand that, which you will not find in the older textbooks.
And maybe not in the newer ones.
Right. So the point is that I'm not at all saying that you have to read Jean-Paul Sartre, which I did like a religious madman, in order to play Beethoven sonatas. But if you want to apply the lessons of 20th century existentialism to 19th century classicism, it's there waiting for you, and it helps you and opens up opportunities.